A pregnant woman is denied boarding. What happens next leaves everyone in tears. It was a rainy Wednesday afternoon when Samantha Keller arrived at the airport, her coat slightly unbuttoned to ease the pressure on her growing belly. At 33 weeks, pregnant, the walk from the taxi to the terminal had already left her breathless, but she was used to pushing through. Ever since Daniel, her husband, was deployed overseas, she'd been managing on her own. Doctor's appointments, baby prep, everything. This trip was meant to be a break, a chance to stay with her mother for the final weeks of her pregnancy. A little peace before the chaos of new life. Inside the terminal, people rushed past her. Families dragging suitcases, businessmen on calls, vacationers laughing. Samantha moved slowly but purposefully toward Gate 12, holding her boarding pass like a lifeline. Her eyes scanned the overhead signs. She was early, but she didn't want to take chances. Her back ached, her feet were swollen, and she needed to sit down. At the gate, she approached the counter, smiling politely at the gate agent. The woman barely glanced up. Samantha handed over her ID and boarding pass with a quiet, "Good afternoon." The agent's eyes finally lifted, only to land on Samantha's belly. There was a pause. "How far along are you?" 33 weeks, Samantha answered. "I have a doctor's note. I'm cleared to fly." But the agent didn't take the paper. She stared, unimpressed, and shook her head. "We don't allow boarding after 32 weeks unless pre-approved by the airline. Did you call ahead?" Samantha blinked. "No, I wasn't told I needed to. My doctor said." "I'm sorry, ma'am," the agent cut her off. "You can't board. It's policy." People behind her shifted impatiently. Samantha could feel their eyes. Her cheeks flushed. "Please," she said softly, unfolding the note and offering it again. "I need to get home." But the agent had already turned away. "Next passenger, please." And just like that, Samantha was left standing there, 8 months pregnant, stranded at a crowded terminal, holding a useless note and a boarding pass that no longer meant anything. She stepped aside, lowered herself onto the nearest bench, and stared at the floor. Around her, the airport carried on. No one stopped. No one offered help. But someone had been watching, and that someone was about to change the entire course of her day and her life. Tom Bradley was seated 2 rows back near the gate, sipping lukewarm airport coffee and scrolling through an article. He wasn't really reading. He had noticed Samantha the moment she arrived, pregnant, clearly tired, and alone. He wasn't eavesdropping on purpose, but the tension at the counter had been hard to ignore. The short exchange, the way the gate agent dismissed her without a second glance, the flicker of disbelief on Samantha's face, it all unfolded right in front of him like a moment stuck in slow motion. Tom had spent 20 years flying in and out of places like this as an Air Force pilot. He'd seen a lot, missed flights, tight calls, and bureaucratic nonsense. But something about this particular situation bothered him more than most. Maybe it was the way no one else reacted. Maybe it was how visibly humiliated she looked. Or maybe it was because she reminded him so much of his own wife years ago, also heavily pregnant, also standing in an airport, doing everything she could to just make it home. Tom glanced at the boarding line. It was moving now. One by one, people stepped forward, scanned their passes, and disappeared through the jet bridge. He looked back at Samantha, still seated on the bench, clutching a crumpled doctor's note in one hand and wiping her face with the other. The rest of the world continued on without her. He stood up. The gate agent looked surprised when he stepped out of line and back to the counter. "Sir, boarding is almost complete. You'll need to—" "I'm not boarding," Tom said simply, pulling out his ticket and handing it back. "Go ahead and give my seat to someone else." The agent furrowed her brow. "You're giving up your seat?" Tom didn't explain. He just turned and walked toward the bench where Samantha sat. She noticed him approaching and straightened up, clearly unsure what to expect. "Hi," Tom said, his voice calm. "I saw what happened." Samantha blinked. "It's fine. I'll figure something out." "No, it's not fine," Tom said gently. "You shouldn't be sitting here alone. That was wrong." Samantha tried to smile, tried to be polite. "Thank you, but I don't want to be a problem." "You're not," Tom said. "You're a person who deserves better, and I'm going to make sure you get where you need to go." She looked at him, startled. "Why would you do that?" Tom gave a small shrug. "Because someone once did it for my wife, and I never forgot." Tom walked with quiet determination, leading Samantha back toward the airline's customer service desk. She hesitated at first, not wanting to cause more trouble, but something in his voice reassured her. He wasn't just being nice, he was standing up for her in a way no one else had. At the desk, Tom calmly explained what had happened, how Samantha had been denied boarding despite having a doctor's clearance and valid paperwork. The representative, a younger man with a nervous smile, initially tried to deflect. "We have policies for pregnancy travel," he said, "especially in the third trimester." "She followed your rules," Tom replied firmly. "You didn't even read the note." The tension in his voice wasn't aggressive, but it was commanding. Years of leadership had given him a tone people didn't question easily. The supervisor was called in, and within minutes, the situation began to shift. Samantha was offered a seat on a different flight scheduled for later that evening, one with more medical support on board just in case. They even promised to pre-board her and arrange wheelchair assistance to the gate. It was a complete reversal from the cold dismissal she'd received just an hour earlier. When she turned to thank Tom, her voice cracked. "You didn't have to give up your flight for me," Tom smiled. "Some things matter more than where I need to be." Samantha wasn't used to this kind of kindness. Strangers usually averted their eyes, looked at their phones, or stepped away, but Tom had stepped in. He didn't just witness her struggle, he chose to be part of the solution, and for the first time that day, she felt like maybe she wasn't so alone. As the new boarding arrangements were made, a few passengers nearby, who had overheard what was happening, began whispering. One woman leaned over to Samantha and said softly, "He's a good man," and he was. But what neither of them knew was that the story wasn't staying at the airport. A passenger who had seen the whole interaction had quietly taken a photo and shared it online, writing, "A pregnant woman was denied boarding. A stranger gave up his own seat and stood up for her when no one else did. Kindness still exists." By the time Samantha was called to board her new flight, that post was already beginning to gain traction, but her heart was focused only on one thing, that her baby, growing stronger each day, had already seen the best in people before even arriving in the world. Samantha sat in her newly assigned seat, first row, window, first class. It felt surreal, not just because of the comfort, but because of what had led to it. Her hands rested on her belly, her fingers gently tracing the curve of life growing inside. The events of the past hour played again and again in her mind. Denied, humiliated, and then rescued. Not by someone in uniform, not by a staff member, but by a man she didn't even know. A flight attendant approached with a soft smile and a blanket folded over one arm. "Miss Keller," she said gently, "Mr. Bradley wanted us to make sure you were comfortable. He also asked us to tell you he hopes you get home safe." Samantha's throat tightened as she nodded, unable to say more than a quiet, "Thank you." Meanwhile, Tom sat alone in the terminal, waiting for a hotel voucher that the airline had offered him after learning what he'd given up. He wasn't one for attention, but people kept walking by and offering quiet nods of respect. A teenage boy stopped to shake his hand. An older couple thanked him for reminding them there were still decent people left in the world. All of it felt overwhelming. Tom hadn't done it for recognition. He'd done it because it was right. Back in the air, Samantha stared out the window, at the clouds below. Her body was finally at rest, but her heart wasn't. She thought about her husband overseas, about how much he'd given to serve strangers he'd never meet. And now, a stranger had done something just as selfless for her. It felt like the universe was gently reminding her that goodness still found its way into the hardest moments. Somewhere over the country, turbulence shook the plane briefly, waking her from her thoughts. She instinctively placed a hand over her stomach and whispered, "Almost home, little one." By the time the plane touched down, Samantha was emotionally drained but deeply thankful. Airport staff escorted her through the terminal where her mother, waiting near baggage claim, rushed forward the moment she saw her. Tears flowed instantly, the kind that only a mother and daughter could understand. "You made it," her mom said through sobs. "You're really here." Samantha nodded, hugging her tightly. "I had help." What she didn't realize was that while she was hugging her mother, that quiet photo taken at the gate earlier had now reached over 100,000 people online, and it was just beginning to spread. By the time Samantha was settling into her childhood bedroom that night, finally off her swollen feet and wrapped in one of her mother's old quilts, the world was already watching. What had started as a single photo, Tom handing back his ticket while Samantha sat heartbroken nearby, had become a story reshared across dozens of platforms. The caption was simple. A man gave up his flight and stood up for a stranger who was 8 months pregnant. He didn't ask questions. He just acted with kindness. The post exploded. People commented from around the world. "This made me cry," one user wrote. "The world needs more Toms." Others shared their own stories, times when someone helped them or when they wished they had spoken up. It became more than a viral moment. It became a movement. Meanwhile, Tom was just getting into his hotel room, unaware of the waves he had set in motion. His phone was buzzing non-stop. Friends, colleagues, even people he hadn't heard from in years. One message read, "You're trending, man. You made the news." Tom frowned in confusion until he finally clicked one of the links. And there it was, his face, the photo, the story, and thousands of people calling him a hero. He stared at the screen, stunned. He hadn't done it for attention. He wasn't looking for headlines. In fact, he preferred to keep his head down, stay out of the spotlight. But this was something else entirely. At the same time, Samantha's mother saw the story online and gasped. "Honey, you're on the internet!" Samantha blinked in confusion, then stared at the screen. There she was, that exact moment at the airport, frozen in time. And suddenly, the emotions came flooding back. Not just the hurt, but the moment someone stepped in when no one else did. She reached for her phone and sent a message to the contact card Tom had given her at the hotel. "They're calling you a hero, but to me you were just human when it mattered most. Thank you again." Tom read the message, smiled softly, and replied with only 4 words. "You deserved better, always." But neither of them knew that the story wasn't done yet, because the next morning, a knock would come at Samantha's door, one that would take her breath away. It was just after 9 a.m. when Samantha heard the knock at her mother's door. She wasn't expecting anyone, certainly not this early, but something in the rhythm of the knock felt familiar. Her mom opened it first, and Samantha heard a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "Sam," her mother called softly, "you need to come here." Samantha moved slowly, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, then stepped into the front hallway. Standing on the porch was Tom, not a news crew, not a delivery, but the man who had quietly changed her life just a day earlier. She blinked, stunned. "Tom? What are you—" He smiled gently and lifted a small box in his hands. "I had some unused miles saved up. Figured I'd put them to good use." She laughed through a mix of shock and joy. "You came all this way?" Tom nodded. "Didn't like the idea of our goodbye being at a boarding gate. And well, I wanted to meet your mom properly. Seems like I interrupted your journey. Figured I'd walk part of it with you now." Her mother stepped back to give them space, tears welling in her eyes. The visit wasn't dramatic or loud. There were no grand gestures or speeches. Tom didn't want thanks or recognition. He just wanted to check in, to make sure she was okay, to keep the promise he'd made without ever saying the words out loud. They sat in the kitchen, talked over coffee, and shared stories that made the room feel warm, even in the morning chill. Tom told her about his wife, the years of service, the reason why he always paid attention when someone looked like they were about to fall through the cracks. Samantha told him about the baby, her hopes, her fears, and how that one small act of kindness had shifted everything inside her. He didn't stay long, just a few hours. But before leaving, he placed a small card on the table. It was a handwritten note with a line that read, "When the world is cold, kindness warms more than blankets ever could." Samantha held that card. Long after he left, she didn't know if she'd ever see him again. But the way he showed up, not just once, but twice, had already left a mark that would last far beyond one flight or one delay. It was proof that strangers could become anchors in the most unexpected moments, and still, one more moment was yet to come. Something that would leave the entire country watching and weeping. Weeks passed. The story that had once taken over social media slowly faded from the trending lists, replaced by other headlines. But for Samantha, the impact remained as vivid as the day it happened. Every time she looked down at her growing belly, she remembered the bench, the gate, the tears, and the hand that reached out when no one else did. Then, one quiet afternoon, in early spring, Samantha gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Her labor was long but steady, her mother by her side every second, whispering words of strength, wiping away her tears, and laughing through exhaustion when the first cry filled the delivery room. It was one of those rare moments where the world stood still. She named him Thomas. The nurses smiled when she said it, assuming it was a family name. And in a way, it was, but not by blood, by impact. She didn't share the full story with everyone. Only her mother knew the weight of that name, the reason behind it, the quiet man in the airport who gave up his flight, his comfort, his day, just so a stranger could get home. 2 months later, Samantha wrote a letter, a real one, handwritten and sent by mail, because she knew it meant more that way. Inside, she tucked a photo of her son, bundled in a soft blue blanket, eyes bright and curious. The note was short. "You once gave up a seat so I could go home. I hope you know you didn't just give up a seat. You gave my son a safe arrival, and me a moment I'll carry forever. His name is Thomas. I thought you should know. Tom received it on a Saturday morning. He opened it at his kitchen table, sunlight spilling through the window. His hand stilled as he read the words, then turned the photo over in his fingers. He didn't cry, not exactly, but his chest tightened in that way it does when the world suddenly feels heavier and brighter. All at once, he placed the photo on the fridge, right next to one of his late wife, and for the first time in a long time, he whispered something out loud into the stillness of his home. You'd have liked her, because sometimes, the smallest act, a seat given up, a voice that speaks when no one else will, becomes the beginning of a story that lives in someone's heart forever. And this story, born in a moment of quiet courage, ended not with applause, not with headlines, but with a name that will carry kindness into the next generation.